Hello, welcome to Mind the Machine podcast. This is a conversation about the confluence of technology and the human experience. With Mind the Machine, I'm going to bring to you the best in the industry and the business and the innovators that are going to inform our future. But I'm also going to reflect back on this book that I wrote, How to Win Friends and Influence Robots, which is an evergreen guide for the non-technical journey for folks that want to have real impact in AI. So I hope you join us for this show and for many more. Welcome to the pod. All right, friends, on our debut episode, we have the best that can be had for kicking off Mind the Machine, and that is Dr. Irwin Jacobs. Now, let me spill the tea on Irwin Jacobs. If you haven't been paying attention, you've been living under your bed, quivering and trembling about AI, but now you're crawling out and you're saying, oh, what's all this about? Well, Qualcomm is the center of all of these things, all these connections in the devices because of the connections that happen with our devices. And so how did Qualcomm get its start? Well, it started with Dr. Irwin Jacobs. And this man, born in 1933, 92 years old, and believe me, he can run faster than I can. He is an amazing innovator. The key takeaway that I want you to get from this conversation is three things. So number one is, this is a conversation for someone who's been there, done that. Not only Dr. Jacobs, but myself. It's 24 years in technology. 10 of those years were at Qualcomm. Dr. Jacobs was CEO when I started. Now, 6 months later, he moved on to be the chairman, still very much driving the organization. But easy to say is that Qualcomm is the heart and soul and the essence of mobile connectivity. And it's the reason that we can capture this show today. It's the reason behind the fact that we have a camera, the ideas behind having a camera, behind having the ability to have video, all of those things that are happening in the smartphone as a result of the innovations squarely on the shoulders of innovations from Qualcomm, and specifically Dr. Irwin Jacobs. So that's the number one thing. Number two thing is, if you look at this individual, as he was born in New Bedford, Massachusetts, and in that city, it used to be the wealthiest in the nation. But when he was growing up, it wasn't. And so he understands the importance of how one person has the ability to innovate and create new economies rather, throughout not only their own city, but the nation and the globe and the world. And that's what mobile commerce has done. We know that because today, if you look at African commerce, what's happening in Africa, what's happened in the smartphone, the adoption of smartphones, is that there were never landlines, underground lines built for wireless. It was always a wireless experience. In the net message there is that you can have nothing, but you could have great e-commerce business with a mobile phone in the middle of a desert. And that's what I call significant and fundamental innovation. The third thing that I wanted to share with you is that this conversation, while you might say, okay, yeah, he was CEO, co-CEO rather, or co-founder rather, and CEO emeritus of Qualcomm. What's he thinking about today? When I tell you, there's no slowing down. So you're going to want to stay tuned to not only this conversation, but future conversations of Mind the Machine, because I am your guide as I've been there through every analog to digital transition. And before we jump in the show, let me tell you one more thing. When I started my career in 1997 in the newsroom, an ABC newsroom, there was no YouTube. I'm older than Google. And this is important because I am your guide to these transitions from analog to digital, and being in the AI economy is no different. There is a pattern and there's a recognition, and together we're going to uncover what it means to really see who's changing the landscape in innovation. So, up next, Dr. Irwin Jacobs. But with that, Dr. Jacobs, I'm going to start out with your first question. I got a few. And the question is you've been called philanthropist in chief. You've been called the man behind 1 billion connections.
probably more than 1 billion connections, right? But you've also, because you've pioneered the use of CDMA, and obviously the lesser known link a bit, but as Kathy had shared, it was really the origin seed of all of the innovations that happened. So the question is, how do you see yourself today in the sense of what excites you in technology that you're seeing today? What's exciting to you?
Well, I suspect, again, with technology moving ahead, it's very hard to predict what's going to happen within 10 years or so. And so in planning within the companies, might look ahead 5 years, and then things will have changed greatly by the time you get there. But right now, obviously, I think there's going to be a huge impact of the combination of robotics and AI. And it's interesting because it took probably over a decade for computers to make a major business impact, be able to see a significant increase in productivity. Even the cell phone, which went to 7 or 8 billion around the world at this point, took a long time to itself have much of an impact on productivity. I think both the computers and the cell phones have had that impact. But I think with AI and robotics, we're going to see a much faster change, a fairly sharp rise in productivity as companies and entrepreneurs begin to find the best ways to make use of this technology and apply it and increase all our productivities. I think that it's probably going to lead to shorter work weeks. We'll probably go from 40 to 32 and maybe even lower over time. But it's also going to give us some problems as any new technology does, of how best to handle that in the world. So if we're getting higher productivity, where do the benefits go? And part of them will go to the people that own the AI machinery and the robotics and people that come up with great new ideas for doing it. But I think we have to make sure to spread it more evenly than we have done in the past. And we'll have the opportunity to do that as productivity goes up and we can make good use of it and improve our health, improve our education. The other interesting aspect is that as people have more spare time, if they're working shorter work weeks or whatever, they're going to need better hobbies, more education of areas that they didn't cover, more artistic involvement, cultural involvement. And so again, I think it has the prospects of really making a very substantial change. Now, part of that will in fact use other technology like virtual reality, and we'll be able to, I think, greatly improve our education system among these various technologies. But lots of interesting things yet to be done, many of which we haven't even really thought of.
That's a wonderful answer, and I just want to hone in on two aspects of that response. And one is, you mentioned education. So you have a sea of entrepreneurs out here that are really eager to hear your playbook, but we also have a lot of students in our organization that are really trying to understand how do they participate in this new AI economy, and what would you say are the best skills and attributes a student can have, a young entrepreneur, to ready themselves for this epic change?
Yeah, one thing I've always, when I was on faculty at MIT and UCSD, one thing I always recommended is you want to get some broad education, but in particular you want to go deep in certain areas, because there's certain areas that will, whatever the technology, however things change in the future, if you're well grounded in your physics and your math, your chemistry, biology, other areas, then you can make use of it and keep up with the changes, take advantage of the changes that are ongoing. So some depth in your education, as well as, of course, getting some breadth as far as having a variety of courses, maybe in some areas that you may not ever think that you're going to make use of. One that always comes up in my case, as I started in the hotel school at Cornell due to some faulty advising by my high school counselor, and the fact my folks had a restaurant at the time. But I took a year of accounting and I took a half year of business law. After getting into business, that also turned out to be very useful. So you want to get grounding in a number of areas. The other one that came up along that line is when we started Linkabit, it began to grow. I had to get more and more involved, and so I took a year's leave. At the end of that year, the question was whether or not to go back to teaching again, which is a great way to spend your life, involved with students and new areas, or to go into business. And I decided on the latter. My rationale was that I'd been teaching theory for years with the claim that that theory would be useful in the real world. And so here was a chance to demonstrate that that was the case. And so that was a rationale for moving out.
And I would imagine, and having heard you talk about this in the past, is that the accounting and the business law at Cornell from the hospitality school made you a better engineer and business person that, would you say, was a big attribution to your success initially with Linkabit?
Well, when you start a company, or particularly Linkabit was just a few of us, and so you have to do every job in the company. And accounting and keeping track and doing program management, all of these things you eventually learn, do yourself, actually perhaps prepare some software because the software wasn't available back in those days. And then eventually you know enough, you go and hire the right person to do it for you.
Right. You don't
and so
suffer
that's
forever.
Important. Right.
You grow, make that money. Right. Well, I'm going to shift gears just a little bit because we have an exclusive San Diego audience. San Diego, I believe, is a very unique place in large part to the contribution that you and Joan have made to the community in the arts, but certainly with the technology. What do you think is unique about San Diego? And if you had to give advice to another city, what's our playbook of innovation there? What makes us so unique they can duplicate?
Well, San Diego has a uniqueness in that many of us came here from elsewhere. I mean, it's a desirable area. It has good education, good medical systems.
It's not just the surf.
Not bad weather. And so a lot of us have moved here from elsewhere. And when we came here, often we were welcomed by others here. And so I think it's a friendly environment as a result, and one where there's a lot of cooperation among the different groups. There's some older cities where it depends how long ago your family moved there and what your lines are within the city. But here it's just much more open to new ideas and working together. And you can see that with the universities cooperating. There are research institutions cooperating. There are a lot of companies that get involved with the university through industrial relations. It's just a great advantage of San Diego that wasn't particularly planned. I think it kind of happened that way.
Serendipitously. Is there anything in the San Diego culture community you would like to see change or evolve up? In the community in San Diego that you think there's an opportunity for growth, or any challenges or changes you would?
San Diego always has this issue as a city and political situation of people not wanting to pay more taxes. And there's always a large number of things that have to be done as a community as opposed to individually. And to do that, one needs to pay those taxes. So that's always an issue. The other, of course, has to do with just, in a sense, segregation that has happened over the years in a variety of different ways. When we came here, I'm Jewish, and Jewish families until 2004, I'm sorry, get my years.
66, right, is when you
I came in 66 until 64. You have to forgive me, decades seem to go by too quickly.
I don't think anyone's worried about it. You're good.
Until 64, there weren't Jewish families allowed to live, to buy a home in San Diego. So that's obviously changed. And so these things have caused different groups to live in different parts of the city. And that, with the education system, one typically tries to go to schools that are in your vicinity. And so we end up still with a higher level of segregation. It's up to the school committees and the teachers and the school unions to really work toward making sure the quality of teaching in the schools everywhere within the city is uniform.
Right.
I think there's been a lot of effort at the university level, at the community college levels, and so on to broaden it. The Supreme Court these days is not helping us too much in some of these areas, but I think it's very important. And a company, well, first of all, when you're going to school, you want to form your networks, and it would be good to have a variety of people in those networks because you're never quite sure where you're going to, your product, if you're preparing one, which group it's going to work best with. You want to have an openness to many groups. And so it's just, again, very important to be able to have that as you begin to build your relationships.
Very insightful. The theme this year of our conference is really, Kathy had led with this, with grit. What makes an entrepreneur really successful is having grit. And I'd like to ask you, what is your greatest attribute that you think enabled you to have the success you've had? And what would you say to these entrepreneurs about that attribute?
Sometimes I say it's waking up at 4 a.m.
That'll do it.
Well, you have an idea, you're pursuing it. Should you continue? Should you make a turn, adjustment? How should you best handle it? Should you indeed continue to invest and put more effort into it? And you can talk about that with many people during the day and get a variety of ideas and your own advice. And somehow when I wake up at 4 a.m., the brain is in a different mode, and problems I hadn't thought of before come up. Mm-hmm. Solutions sometimes come up, but it's just a chance to review. Are we on the right track? If we are, I go back to sleep.
So early riser, early birds do get in the worm, indeed, right?
Right. Now, there's another issue with how entrepreneurship is handled in some educational settings and up in Silicon Valley and so on. And that's the idea that it's okay to start work at something and fail, it just didn't work out. Leave that, go on to the next one, maybe have another failure, and eventually, hopefully, hit a success. My own feeling is you don't want any failures. And so you have some ideas, you'll begin working on it. You're always going to have to change directions as you're going along because whatever your good idea was originally, in general, I won't say always, but in general, you're going to have to make a number of significant changes. And so you have to be open to that. And I call it dynamic programming. You've got some work, it's going on, whoops, that 4 o'clock wake up or whatever said, maybe I better do something a little differently, and you just have to keep adjusting. Now, the other thing, both Linkabit and Qualcomm, we started, well, with Linkabit, there weren't spreadsheets, I don't think, at the time. But we started without a financial plan. We started without a product in mind in both cases. In the case of Linkabit, when I moved out here, there were just lots of requests for consulting. As a faculty member, typically consult a day a week. And so I happened to mention that to a couple of friends from UCLA on a plane ride down from NASA Ames, and there was more consulting. They said, well, let's start a company and share the consulting. And I said, okay, as long as I don't have to manage it. And that's how Linkabit started. And of course, as I say, you make adjustments as you're going along. So I actually ended up chair and CEO. But
So it sounds like a good ending to be, right? The other theme of our conference, Dr. Jacobs, this year is waves. Is wave of innovation, and anytime there's a wave, there's this opportunity that you have to seize, and it's about recognizing opportunity. Could you talk a little bit about your ability to recognize opportunity, whether it was at Cornell or at MIT or when you came to start UCSD? Do you have a playbook about recognizing opportunity?
Well, first of all, you have to be open to new ideas and do a lot, I'd say, get a very good education and then continue to read a lot, talk with people. Most ideas that you'll hear back probably should be passed over, not all. But the main thing is to get lots of different viewpoints. And at some point you get an idea that, boy, maybe there's a product here or something I can do and press in that direction. Or in the case of Linkabit, we often bid on contracts where somebody else had a need, and then we try to work on that. But the key thing is, no matter what you're doing, what I always say is you, first of all, want to look for an elegant solution. You don't want to do something that's just ordinary. You want to look for an elegant way, a clean way, a nice way of working with whatever the problem is. And be open, again, to innovation. And clearly in the product area, coming up with a new way of doing things, an elegant way, is innovative. It's interesting in a business, although people don't always think of it that way, that every aspect of the business can be run in an innovative fashion. There's old ways of doing things and there's new ways of doing things. And the faster you go and think about the new ways and encourage people working with you to look for those new ways of doing things, the better off you are.
Do you advise a core group of advisors, or broad feedback, or is it a gut instinct?
No, talk with everyone.
Okay.
And as the company, Qualcomm actually, as it grew, I think I got a number of my new thoughts and so on, riding with people in the elevator, going up to whatever floor, asking what are they doing, learning about it, running with that.
Truly an elevator pitch.
An elevator, oh, we got her.
Making our way to the top. So I have a really interesting question in anticipation of having this conversation. I went out to social media and said, what would you want to hear from Dr. Jacobs? And I got a really interesting question from a young woman who had interviewed you in 1994. And her name was Allison Saldana, and she's an electrical engineering student. And she had interviewed you, and you were talking about the vision of the one device of the cell phone. So it was 1994. We weren't there yet. And the question is, do you feel that you've met that vision of what you envisioned in 1994 of where the cell phone, of where that device would be? Does that match your vision today?
Well, first of all, we started thinking about in 1988.
Yeah, okay, right. So it's
yeah, the idea of using CDMA technology for a digital conversion for cell phones actually came within a couple of months of starting the company. Okay. It was on a consulting contract for Hughes Aircraft, and they had asked us, they knew about our Linkabit background, so they knew we could do interesting things. And so they asked us to review a proposal they had written to look for the technology, whether there was some improvements. And it was on our drive down from LA, where they were located, to San Diego, about halfway, that I realized that it was for a mobile satellite communication, that CDMA might be the right answer for a few reasons, not all the reasons it turned out, but for a few reasons. And came back and asked the engineer who was with me, Klein Gilhausen, to take a couple of days and look and see if this may have a payoff that we can bring back to Hughes. And 2 days later, I did stop in his office and ask, how's it coming? And his answer was, were you serious? Because at that time, CDMA was not thought of as a useful way for communications. But indeed, because it allows you better use of, I won't go into the technology, but better use of frequency and time, and particularly the ability to make use of gaps when somebody stops talking and you listen, or you're thinking yourself and you've paused. The limitation on CDMA is the interference from all the other users. And so if the other users are not talking over a little time, and there's a large number of them, you get back that average as an ability to increase capacity. So a number of different issues here, but again, being open to a new idea, take it, run with it, and see where it may take you.
Did you think it would have the significant impact?
Coming back to your question, once I stop talking,
That's okay.
I lose the question.
That's okay. But you know, when you walk around, Dr. Jacobs, and you see people like this, and you say every person almost, they will turn their car back around to get their phone if they've left it. Most will. Did you think it'd have that ingrained impact?
Well, when we started thinking about what we could do with our technology and move it ahead, and by that time we did have to put together business plans. And so you put together a business plan, you think about how many people might be using that in another 2 or 3 years. Didn't make sense, so we divided by 2. And still didn't make sense, so we divided by 2 again. And finally you get down to a number that you can look at with a straight face. But of course, all those factors of 2 actually happened. And so it has spread the uses of it, some of which we anticipated and went out and helped people in the farming industry, fishing, education, a number of different areas.
Right, yeah.
But there's a whole set of uses, and of course all the social networking was not something that kind of real, very early on, once we got to a point where we had not just voice communication, but had come up with an efficient way of being able to send data wirelessly and get reasonably high data rates, and therefore internet access, that then opened up a whole range of new possibilities. And again, you provide a capability, whatever the ideas you have, you provide some capability. You're not going to be able to really anticipate all the uses that are made of that.
Absolutely. Well, it is kind of phenomenal. The same thing with AI. How do we chart something that the trajectory is, so the multitude of trajectories that we won't know will go, but we do know there's efficiency, right?
With the cell phones, one of the early decisions, though, was to aim for low cost, for large, not just a few of them, but have almost everybody in the world have a cell phone over time.
Right, because I think the first cell phones, if I recall, were in the $4,000 range, these car phones and, 30 minutes of talk time and...
Yeah, there's actually a true story that the cellular technology was invented at Bell Labs. The idea of using cell towers and handing calls off and reusing the same frequency band just in the neighborhood of a cell. And that came out of Bell Labs. So at some point they hired, I think it was Boston Computing. It was one of the companies that help you with your business planning. And asked them, should we go and begin to manufacture the phones and the infrastructure? And they studied it and looked at the price of the phone and the price of the service, and they said, well, there may be 1 million users by the year 2000. And so AT&T did not go ahead, and they were off by a couple of orders of magnitude.
Yeah,
and
just
so
a couple.
The name of the game, of course, is you don't look at what's possible today. It's what's going to be possible when you're bringing a product to market. So in the case of cell phones, we already could see Moore's law, where you double the capacity of a chip number of transistors on a chip roughly pretty precisely every 2 years up till now. And so if you take that into account, you move ahead. For example, when we talked about CDMA, it was a terrible battle because much of the world was going with time division as opposed to code division, multiple access. And so they have, you'll get a lot of arrows in your back if you're going up with an innovative new idea. People will doubt it, particularly if it's affecting their business. But again, that's something you just have to pursue.
Well, I like this arrow in the back thing because I think in this audience, we've got a lot of arrows in our back, right? It's not easy to be an entrepreneur. You have to really have that vision. Not everyone believes the vision.
Let me interrupt just a second.
Please.
There's one funny aspect of that, talk about it.
Yeah.
There was an article in the Wall Street Journal, even after we'd had our first commercial network operating in Hong Kong in '95, and a couple more in South Korea, and then just beginning to enter the U.S. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal that quoted a couple of professors up at Stanford saying that, we violated the laws of physics, what we were saying was not going to work out, et cetera, et cetera. And I did write an answer, which they never published, naturally. But the thing that was interesting was I ended up very shortly thereafter going to Europe to a conference there and meeting a whole bunch of people in the industry. Everybody came around congratulating me for this article they saw in the Wall Street Journal. So again, they say, of course, in the old days, ink is important.
Right.
The content, people kind of lost. They saw the name of the company and they remembered it.
Oh my gosh. Well, I don't know if that's changed. I think that still very much holds true. But the question I wanted to ask you is when we met to talk about this conversation, I asked for a selfie. I couldn't help myself. And Dr. Jacobs says, when I was proposed and socialized the idea of a camera and a phone, got a little resistance. I'd love for you to talk about that conversation of bringing a camera to a cell phone.
Right. It was about 1999 that we were getting finally high data rates and good internet access and thinking about the other things one might do with the phone. And so I had mentioned in several talks I was giving that we were also looking at putting a camera on our phone. And universally, everybody's reaction was, why would I ever want a camera on my phone? So sometimes I say you have to, because the issue is people don't realize where the technology might be able to go. They're just not in the field the way you might be. And so if you have an idea that you mention to a few people and they kind of scoff at it, it's probably because they just don't appreciate the potential value and the possibility of actually making something like that work.
They don't have the vision. And I would say from the phone, of course, then it was for Qualcomm specifically, media flow would broadcast over the air signals. And now you're really talking about your battery taking a hit. So my question related to that is, when you think about difficult technology problems to solve, like battery technology, is there one that you're optimistic on? And what do you think about the state of battery technology? Is that getting any better? Or anything exciting there?
Well, I know there's some good work going on here at UCSD.
Oh, that's good to know.
And probably other areas around.
You're going to spill the beans?
And there's companies starting up. The problem with a lot of the battery technology is that with different chemistries, you can get them to work as prototypes. It's the scaling up that seems to have killed a lot of companies. Plus, we're seeing a lot of strong competition from elsewhere, in particular China. They took the step toward, the pollution there was terrible, particularly Beijing, where all the leaders are. And so I think they proceeded to push on going electric with the cars, and so they do have a lead, and they've done a great job with the batteries. But I think there's room for, obviously, for more work. whether it ends up being the batteries or we go back to nuclear to fill in between the wind, and solar and wind not being 24 hours necessarily. It'll be interesting, but I think there's a place for both.
Yeah, I think that
driving an electric car these days, I love.
Yeah, that's great. That is great. Yeah, when Microsoft had talked about it, the World Economic Forum is using their AI platform to ideate a new chemistry for battery technology in a span of 2 months. And so when I think about AI, I do think about those large problems that are trying to be solved, less of the generative AI and more of these macro problems. Are there any areas that excite you with AI for these macro problems?
Well, first of all, can it help us with our energy balance, and can it help us design better nuclear reactors, both fission or fusion? And there'll be work going on, I think, again here at UCSD, and I'm sure many other places on both these areas. Microsoft, I think it was Microsoft, or was it Google, maybe both, have been looking and putting money into nuclear to provide the power for stations. The industry hasn't moved as fast as it might have to lower energy for a computing cycle as we've achieved in cell phones. So there's motion in that direction that, use less power for the computing. Are there better algorithms? Is there a way of using less input information? Do we need everything on the internet and everything in every book in the Library of Congress, et cetera? I think probably we will, in fact, keep digitizing everything and then feeding into our AI.
But healthcare, for example, not to interrupt, but I think about the power of AI for healthcare, for problems that we've struggled with as a society for a long time in the realm of healthcare. Anything that is exciting to you in that?
Well, of course, the pattern recognition, so being able to take various kinds of scans and then be able to have
imaging,
imaging find it better.
Excellent. Excellent. All right, so we're going to switch gears just a little bit. Kathy had mentioned the transition to academia to industry, which we're all so grateful for, of course, because you've impacted society. But what did you like better, right? What did you like better from academia versus industry? Or maybe it's not an either or.
No, it's in fact running a company that somewhat similar to the way you have a university. University, new people coming in, asking questions, trying to come up with new ideas, having lectures. We tried to run the companies in a similar fashion, so learned a lot from the university. When people have asked me about the transition from academia over to business, and now that you have to spend some of your time on the accounting problems, the customer problems, et cetera, I always said, well, at the university, you spend maybe half your time on the subject matter, teaching, doing your research, et cetera, and a significant part of your time in committees. And the difference between business and academia as far as committees, in business you can make a decision. You're dividing your time in both cases, but in one sense it's a bit more satisfaction being able to move a little more quickly.
Right. And I would say in that same vein, in that career path, when you look back, or anything that you had regretted in your career path from moving from academia, or anything that you wish you could change?
Well, it all worked out pretty well.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, absolutely. All right. One of our board members, I also asked all our boards, what do you want to know? Got lots of great questions, and I think this is one of the better ones. Very few entrepreneurs in history have ever taken a startup all the way from inception to a Fortune 500. What stage was the hardest and biggest challenge?
I think every stage, because when you start the company, it's difficult. You only have a few people. You're trying to find business. You're trying to find some money. You're trying to find a way to grow.
Waking up at 4 a.m., right?
Yeah, wake up. Actually, the most interesting, I mean, you always meet people when you're out there trying to raise money or sell your product saying, yeah, you're a college professor, obviously you can do research. And then when you do some good research and get an idea for a product, well, maybe you can build a prototype. And then you kind of work along, you build your prototype. Well, maybe you can do some limited manufacturing. And so every step, people think there's a challenge. If there's a challenge, it's a challenge you may want to take. And there's always a better way of thinking, again, being innovative, a better way of thinking about things. For example, have to remember which company I'm talking about now. It was at Qualcomm, although the same thing will link a bit, where we got into products, and even when we'd sometimes be trying continually to hire well-trained people, include some PhDs from MIT or from, these days, of course, UCSD and other schools. How should you use them? And one of the things was always go in and work with the manufacturing people for a while and get to recognize how hard a problem that is, and that there's always, again, some innovation that be brought in there. And I think Tesla, obviously, this manufacturing hell comments, but going and dealing with them and thinking about them and finding better ways to do things, that there always is an improvement. I'd like to say one other aspect on this strategic is, my memory's not good, I hope I didn't say this before, but yeah, one of the things we always, in looking at which way to go ahead, we always look for something that was innovative in the sense it wasn't a small step, it was a larger step, rather than just making a small improvement, which you may do later with a product. But initially, when you're trying to find that direction to go, look for something that makes a significant difference.
So a revolutionary as opposed to evolutionary type change. That's great advice. So just a time check, we have about, we're going to be wrapping up, landing this plane. I have two more questions for you, and then we'll close out this section. Is the election year, and we're not a political organization, but this is a big time for all of us, and there are issues that are important. What do you think are the most important issues folks should consider in the election year? I mean, there's plenty, right, to choose from.
Somehow getting, well, first of all, a better education, because a lot of people hear things and don't do enough thought as to whether they're accurate, whether you can test them, et cetera. And so we can help that in the education system. Again, social media obviously is something that more and more the population use for getting most of their news. And our algorithms tend, if you like something, to push you over in the area that you like. And so it does tend to cause some separation. Somehow we have to counter that. And I don't think there's any easy answers. But these elections are important, and it's important that we all get out there and vote. Whatever way you're going to vote, get out there. I think there are threats to our country. As you might have gathered from one of my early comments, I think that income inequality is a problem in the country, and that causes some resentment among many people that may be on the wrong side of that. So things that we can do to improve, and if we get this rising productivity, we can do a lot without hurting those we don't want to take from reasonable halves and redistribute it. But if we get that greater productivity, we can do something. So politically, we have to recognize that. The problem, of course, is that most times we elect people for, on the House, 2 years, most often 4 years, and senators 6 years, and they don't necessarily look at the long-term problem. So climate is clearly one of those problems, and if you keep reading about all these problems that are happening down in Florida and Texas, and now coming somewhat further north, we happen to be in a lucky location, but we'll we'll be suffering a bit ourselves here. It's something that we just have to go and do work at. And there's certainly room for technology to be making both reductions in the amount of carbon we generate and per element of productivity, and also ways of, we already have a lot of CO2 up there. How do we get some of that back out?
So just to recap, it's climate, and then the erosion of truth, which is really tied to free press, right? This is great answers. Thank you for that answer. Okay, so final.
I was being very careful.
Yes, you were. You were. Thank you. I think it's really good because, we all have different opinions, but these are certainly universally, I think we all cherish clean air and an earth that's not heating up. But the final question, Dr. Jacobs, is what did I not ask you that you would like to talk about, that you would like to leave this wonderful community with, whether it's inspiration, an idea?
Well, it is a community.
Yeah.
And so the question always is, what can one do to help out with the community? And clearly, if you do start a company and hire people, that's helping. Education, we've talked about. Important, paying taxes, supporting new initiatives. All that ends up being a critical area. What can we do better?
Well, I don't know. That's a big question. I think it really is what would you say?
Well, one of the things, and we've been very involved with philanthropy, in areas that have been important to us. And so education obviously has been an important one. I would certainly never have been where I am at this point if I hadn't had scholarships and fellowships going through school. And so education, medicine is obviously important. We all have problems along the way, and so supporting that. But cultural activities are also very critical. And so starting with Lincoln and then Qualcomm, we've always supported and then personally supported cultural activities. And there's always the issue, is some shareholder going to come up to you if you're have a public company or even a private company? Is somebody going to owner going to come up to you and say, why are you wasting money giving it away to this philanthropy, this cultural organization, rather than distributing it back to shareholders? And my answer was always, the most important thing that a company has is its employees. You never want an employee to leave, a good employee to leave. And employees are always motivated by the community they live in. And so if they see that you're supporting that community and providing things that are very good for their enjoyment, for their children's enjoyment, for the relatives, that makes a very happier employee. So I say to the shareholder, that money is well spent.
Right. So the corporate, that's great. Yes. And I think the takeaway is that corporate social responsibility is an asset for business because you're supporting your talent development, and you can't run a company without talent. Even with AI, you still need that talent, right? Mm-hmm. All right. Well, can we give Dr. Jacobs a hand for his time?
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, well, that's another show in the can, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And just a reminder, wherever you get your podcasts, you can get it Apple, Spotify, almost anywhere. And if you want to watch it on YouTube, of course. But here's the real deal, friends and neighbors, is that on FindGood.tech, that's where you're going to get a lot of the content, the cheat sheets, the courses, the codes, the discounts, all the things that I bring to you as an industry insider so you can get in the game and level up with AI. Thanks for listening and being a part of Mind the Machine.